Okay, good evening, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Hope everybody's having a great day.
Yes.
We are going to kick off the lecture for today. Unfortunately, we're still talking about stuff outside of cybersecurity. So hopefully, one day we can actually get to security and start talking about what you guys paid for. But until then, we will go with the course curriculum. So, pull up today's program. Hopefully, it'll show up one of these days. There we go. All right. So, just to recap, we spent all last week talking about networking, basic IT administrative related stuff. So, again, it's important to note that everything we're covering here, it's not really applicable to you when it comes to your cybersecurity job. All the stuff that we're talking about is going to be done by IT admin or network engineers. Normally, the way it's done is in a company, you're going to have several departments. You're going to have operations. You're going to have IT security. You're going to have, HR and all of those. And more times than not, cybersecurity folks, regardless of your title, analyst or engineer, architect, you will never be authorized to go into your company's network and start changing stuff around. There might be special occasions, but that's often, as we spoke about before, that's done by people who have been hired and trained and certified to actually do that. Those are going to be done by network engineers, professionals who do this stuff all day, every day. Mainly because one, it's very complicated, and two, you need to be knowledgeable on how to do it when it comes to creating routing tables and creating network segmentation. That is something completely outside of a cybersecurity engineer's or analyst's job. But it's good to have a basic understanding of how things work and what your company is doing. So today we're going to be talking about Linux. So just a few things about Linux. Why is Linux important? So does everybody know the difference between operating systems? So we have, Mac, we have Windows operating systems, and then we have Linux operating systems. Does anybody have an experience with Linux, using Linux?
Yeah, I have a little bit. I wouldn't say a deep one, but just that
Yeah, just a
little
little
bit.
bit.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. It's not totally
So
new.
So
So
when we talk about, there's a lot of different flavors of Linux. So Linux is like your base operating system, right? That's your primary kernel. So think of it like this way. You have Windows operating system, but within Windows, you have a lot of different flavors, right? You got Windows 10, you have Windows NT, you have Windows this, Windows that. Same thing
yeah,
with Linux. When we talk about Kali Linux, it's just a version of Linux. So whether it's Kali, whether it's Debian, whether it's Red Hat, whether it's any one of those, it's always going to be based off of the Linux underlying operating system.
yeah,
There's pros and cons to using Linux. Linux, usually in the industry, is often done. Linux is used by usually individuals who are really computer savvy. Why? Because in Linux, even though you do have the ability, like here, where I can point and click, a lot of Linux, when you're using a Linux operating system, everything is manual. So instead of being able to just type or something like that, or click on something, everything that we want is going to be located and done via typing it out. So if I want to copy a file, I'm going to write out the code to copy a file. If I want to delete a file, I'm going to write the code. Instead of just pointing and clicking like you would do in other operating systems, you're actually going to type the words to make it happen. Some people like that, some people don't, depending on, what you like or don't like. Linux does have its pros and cons. I know me personally, it's good for certain instances, but usually in enterprise environments, large scale companies, Oftentimes it's going to be very much Windows based. You're going to have some systems that are going to be Linux oriented, but for the most part, Windows has cornered the market. They have all of the packages, right? So when you have a Windows suite, you're going to have the Excel spreadsheets, you're going to have the PowerPoint, you're going to have the Word documents, you're going to have Power BI, you're going to have the whole slew of Microsoft different applications that are going to be used. And that's often what you'll find in most organizations. Now, there will be some niche stuff. There are going to be stuff that is done on the side using Linux, but for the most part, predominantly, again, depending on the company, most of the time it's always going to be Windows. A lot of the applications that are used within a company type environment are built off of Windows operating systems. So that's another reason why Windows is popular over Kali or over Linux, is because applications are developed specifically to operate in a Windows environment, and less attention is dedicated towards Linux because it's just not used as much in the industry at a large scale. So some of the pros and cons, let me start from the beginning. So contrary to what you might think or hear, Linux is actually a kernel. So another big reason why Linux is so popular is because it's open source, meaning just how it sounds. You essentially have access to the underlying code. You can change it, you can modify it, you can make it any way you want. And that's a big feature of why people like Linux so much, is essentially you can create your own operating system if you know how to, if you know how to modify those kernels and whatnot. For the most part, that's a very small select, percentage of individuals. Most people are not going to go through the complexities and difficulties of trying to write a kernel and create their own Linux operating systems. I've done it with friends before, just as fun, I mean, it's basically you can just create your own personal type of operating system and make it how you want. But, the value is limited, right? Because then the applications that you use, they have to be compatible and so on and so forth. So there's pros and cons to using it. Let's see what this says. So the kernel was originally developed by that guy, Linus, in 91. And today, Linux is a hybrid monolithic kernel with device drivers and kernel extensions. They usually run in privileged space known as Ring O, with unrestricted access to hardware, although some run in user space. In 92, the Linux kernel began working with new project developed by Stallman in 83. A family of Unix operating systems composed of free and open source software, seeking freely distributed operating system solution, frustrated by licensing used by Minix. So the differences between Linux and other operating systems. Linux, unlike Windows, offers true multitasking and is a multi-user, featuring a security scheme based on users and permissions for reading, writing, and executing files and directories. So you can do that in any operating system. For example, if I go to applications and go to a folder, click on this folder action setup, I can do anything I want to the folder, right? And instead of just being able to point and click, now I'm going to be typing everything out and doing it manually.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please ask away.
Yeah, like this Kali Linux.
Yeah.
What is the much variation it has with Ubuntu? Because I know Ubuntu is Linux too.
Yeah, Ubuntu is Linux. Debian is Linux.
Yeah.
The thing about Kali is predominantly used. Let's see if I can pull up. Let me show you some examples. I can't find it right now, but Kali was originally developed specifically for penetration testing and hacking. So it comes pre-bundled with a lot of free open source applications. If I can get to them, here we go. For example, Let me try to find some good ones. So Kali Linux comes pre-bundled with a lot of open source pen testing and ethical hacking type software.
Yeah.
So with all of the different security tools out there, top 10, we have Metasploit, we have Nmap, which stands for network mapping, we have OWASP, we have SQL mapping, we have Wireshark, which is packet inspection, Burp Suite, which is pen testing, Air Cracking, which is cracking for Wi-Fi, and all these different, so web applications, password attacks, wireless attacks, various exploitation tools, reverse engineering, maintaining access. So as you can see, there's a lot of cool stuff here. And there's a lot of cool free open source. Now, there is, the thing called you get what you pay for, right? So this is great. This is awesome. And a lot of these tools are very, useful and helpful.
So in other words, you have more resources for cybersecurity in Kali Linux than, okay.
Yeah. Like your Ubuntu and your other versions of Linux, they're not going to have all of these cool pen testing tools, right? And just a word about these tools is that they're awesome. They're great. A couple of drawbacks to it is that there is limited, and not all, but there's going to be limited support when it comes to using those tools, right? So as opposed to, let's say, I am buying a CrowdStrike DLP tool. I'm going to have a whole team of CrowdStrike engineers that can help me. They're going to be able to provide lots of resources, a lot of training material, a lot of documentation associated with it. Unfortunately, with this, that's not the case. So when you go to use some of these tools, they're great, but you kind of have to go, there's a learning curve to all of these, right? So you're going to have to go and look for documentation, and there is definitely documentation associated with it, but it is limited. So you spend, at least I have found, I spend a lot of my time when using these tools going to different forums, using Google to ask a bunch of questions to figure out how to use something, which is cool. It's free. Again, it is what it is. It's better than nothing, right? But there are those limitations and drawbacks. So I'm not dogging on Linux at all. It's a great tool. It's a great starter kit. But again, you get what you pay for, right? So, and we'll get more into these as the course goes along, and we'll be using some of these tools, and we'll get to see them, in real world, in real time, which is awesome. So that's that. So that's another cool thing about Linux too, is that if you wanted to, if Abu, you wanted to, I want to create my own operating system. Well, here's a naked version of Linux, and you can go and install all these special cool tools and anything you want, you can add it to it if you know how to do it, and you can make your own operating system. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of freedom to kind of do what you like, but with that being said, there's a lot of security associated with it too, and so a lot of people say that Linux is more secure from a security perspective. That's not necessarily true. The reason why there's less exploits in Kali Linux is because it's only a small portion of users that are using it worldwide. A lot of people use it, but comparatively speaking to Mac and Windows, it's the smaller portion out of them all. So hackers and people wanting to exploit some type of system, they're not going to be spending as much time trying to break a Linux operating system because it's just not as popular as, Windows. So it's more advantageous. The ROI is greater. Is someone trying to get in? Hold on a second.
No, that was me. I mistakenly pressed the raise hand button. Yeah.
Okay. So I lost where I was at.
You're talking of hackers paying less attention.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So less time is going to be spent by your hackers trying to break a Linux system because they're just not as popular and they're not, used as much as a Windows is. And there's exceptions to everything. I'm sure there's plenty of companies out there who are just a Linux-based shop, I've worked in the industry in 23 years and working with a lot of companies. I've never seen it. There are, different little departments and little groups of individuals who are super cool about, Linux has their own, they're like a subculture type, like, oh, we use Linux. We're the cool guys, right? We don't use Windows. Windows is for the lames. There's kind of that mentality. Yeah. And it really is. But, so a lot of time by hackers isn't spent trying to crack Linux operating systems because they're just not as popular, and the ROI is just not there.
I want to believe what makes Windows more user-friendly over Linux is the GUI aspect of Windows.
It
makes it so simple.
User interface. Yeah, exactly. Being able to point and click and be able to navigate easier, Absolutely. So based off of this, it says Windows and Linux, type of operating system, commercial, bought and sold. So that's kind of what I was speaking to. It's very, Windows is cornered the market 9 times out of 10. Any company you go to is always going to be usually a Windows-based company. There are some smaller like startups and stuff that are predominantly Mac-based, but that's more expensive and it doesn't happen as much. But and again, Linux is open source. It's free and downloadable and modifiable. So this is another good aspect of it, is that it's free, right? But with that being said, you get what you pay for, Yeah. So stability, Windows, less stable, more stable. I don't know where that's coming from. I would like to see, some type of regression testing or statistics related to that. I'm not sure. I can't vouch for that as it being more stable. But it's possible. Graphical interface, high tech, but unstable. Variety of interfaces, more complex handling. Suitable for beginners, yes, thanks to intuitive graphical interfaces. More complex, requires familiarity with the command line. Security, frequent security failures and vulnerabilities, rarely threatened by security failures. So I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. You definitely have to. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of applications that run on a Linux environment that people try to hack, right? And it's imperative that you are constantly updating all of your stuff. Sometimes you can do automatic updates, but if you want to update, you have to go into the command line terminal. Mm-hmm. You have to type everything out, update, apt-get, and then, you have to type everything out. So you do have to do updates regularly. And it can be a pain in the butt. A lot of times, like when I've worked at companies where I worked in a Linux operating system type environment, every single day I came in, I would essentially have to run updates. That takes about 20 or 30 minutes to where you're just constantly updating all of your stuff and you're running your commands. It is what it is. Updates, simple and automated, sometimes can be complex. So as I just mentioned before. So advantages and benefits of using Linux. The fact that it's free software means that along with the system, you can obtain the source code of any part of it and modify it to your liking. This provides several advantages. For example, the security of knowing what a program does just by looking at the source code, or at least having assurance with the code being available. Okay, the freedom provided by GPL license allows any programmer to modify and improve any part of the system, resulting in very high quality software included in the new. The problem with that is, yes, but you're also opening yourself up to vulnerabilities as well. So if you're creating a new type of feature or add-on to your operating system, you can be subject to what's known as zero-day exploits. So you create something new, someone finds out that they can exploit it, and then there's no malware or any type of anti-malware, any type of patch that can be applied to it that'll prevent you from being compromised because it hasn't been created yet, because you've created your own thing. The fact that system is maintained by a large community of programmers and users around the world provides rapid response rate to errors in programs as they are discovered, unmatched by any commercial software company. So I don't know how true that is. There might be some truth to that, but I would say I wouldn't rely on just saying that Linux is more secure and it's, comparatively speaking to other operating systems, it's the most secure. I don't know if I'd go off of that, but something to keep in mind. In addition to the advantages listed above, Linux is ideal for use in a work environment for two reasons: being free software, there's no cost for licenses, and a copy of Linux can be installed on the computer as needed. There are Office work utilities that are compatible with MS Office Suite tools. So when it says it's ideal for use in a work environment, again, I don't want to, disagree with everything that's here. I don't know if it's ideal because I've used them both. And yes, there are workarounds for MS Office tools. There are free open source ones, but of course they don't work as smooth as, like Windows Suite. No, they're buggy. And there's a learning curve to it, right? So you have to learn how to install it. You have to learn how to use it. Oftentimes, there's not a whole lot of source code or documentation available that can walk you through step by step. So again, you're spending a lot of times in forums, and you're spending a lot of time researching on Google to try to find answers to stuff. So the biggest benefit, I would say, is that it's free. And if you are in a pinch and you want to use, you want to accomplish something for free and not have to buy a Windows operating suite to do your job, you can use this as a workaround. Any questions on that?
Okay.
Pretty straightforward.
No.
So let's talk about the file and directory management. So for a system administrator, having knowledge of navigating and manipulating files and directories is a fundamental part of the job. In Linux, all this can be achieved from the command line. So when they say command line, this is what they mean: CLI, command line interface. So if I do, we'll just run some of these commands. If I type out PWD, that stands for print working document or print working directory. That tells me exactly where I'm at. So right now I'm at home and Mercer. Likewise, if I were on my Mac operating system, this would be same thing: home Mercer, home desktop, coding Mercer. So it tells me. And then once I'm in here, if I do ls, that's going to list everything, all the directories and files that are within the Mercer home drive. So if I do cd desktop, cd stands for change directory. Now I'm in the desktop. And if I do ls, that stands for list. It should show me all of the files in there. So unfortunately, I guess there's no files in my desktop. List all files within subdirectories. So let's see if anything comes up for that. List all files. That's not show all hidden files. Let's do FA. So nothing there, no hidden files. So these are all of the different, your most basic command. I have a book that's like 400 pages that is nothing but all the different commands that you can use to navigate around your operating system. So if I want to copy a file, if I want to create a file, for example, if I wanted to duplicate this file, I could just right click it on here. But if I want to duplicate it, then I would type it out in here and it would be a manual process. So the only main real difference in navigating is instead of being able to use a mouse and click and point around, you type everything out to get to where you need to go. Some people like that. Some people hate it, you know.
This sounds old. It looks old school compared to Windows.
Yeah, it is old school. So it's important to be cautious when using file and directory manipulation commands, as actions are irreversible and can permanently affect data. Always ensure you have up-to-date backups and double check. So that's very important. Once you type in the commands, you're not going to get any like cautionary, are you sure you're about to delete this? Do you want to do it? It's like if you put in the command and do it, it's done. So if I delete something and I accidentally put in the wrong command and I just want to delete a file, but I end up deleting an entire directory, well, then guess what? You just learned a really hard lesson, right? The hard way. So you have to be careful when you're doing these commands and you're typing it in, because you can cause a lot of damage if you put in the wrong commands. So configuring file permissions. Of course, permissions are important because we want to make sure that the files are protected, the data is protected, but more importantly, the people able to access that data have the proper permissions to do it. So if you are root, you are the super user, generally assigned to the system administrator. You essentially can do anything. You have the ability. It's a privilege, or what's the word? Basically, it's just your level of privilege that gives you the highest level of capabilities. Previously, as we discussed permissions in Linux, let's review them. So read, this is the first permission we encounter. Write, if we want to modify something and then save it. Execute, this permission allows to execute various parameters, and no permissions indicates the user has no permissions. Additionally, we can touch on permission levels again. So owner permission identified with U, group permission identified with G, and other permission identified with O. An example would be just like this, D, R, W, X. Those are your different permission capabilities for this particular user in that particular file of whatever that is. It's in Spanish, but so some techniques we can use when assigning permissions to ensure greater system security include least privilege. Does anybody know why least privilege is not only applicable to this, but applicable to everything within the security space? Does anybody want to guess why least privilege is a critical aspect when assigning permissions? So I'll give you an example. When I worked for NSA, I had to have something called a clearance. And there's different classifications of having a clearance. You have like a top secret clearance, you have a confidential, you have a secret clearance. And all those different clearance levels are going to give you access to certain information. However, even though I may have a top secret clearance, which essentially would mean I would be able to have the privilege to do anything, they still implement something known as least privilege. So if I don't need to know it, they're not going to tell me. They're not just going to give me information that's not going to be relevant to my job, because now they're giving me information that I could use, in a nefarious way for whatever reason. So you always want to give people the least amount of privilege possible so they're not able to do things that are not good. So least privilege is an important concept when it comes to cybersecurity. Access control list provides higher level of control over permissions. So usually you can assign multiple people and multiple groups to an access control list. User groups, essentially the same thing, creating user groups, assigning permissions to those groups. So an example might be, I have a particular file. I have the HR department that needs full access to that file. I could create an access control list and user group for them that allows them to have full access for that particular file only. Limit access to sensitive resources. It's advisable to restrict access to sensitive resources such as configuration files and critical systems. Monitor and audit changes. Establish monitoring and auditing mechanisms to track changes in resource permissions. So it's always good to have a log of everything that's been done, an accountability log. And so if anything does get changed, if anything does get modified, you're going to have a trail to identify what was changed, who changed it, what time, so on and so forth, To see the permissions user has on a file, use list tech L command. This will show the various permission types for that directory. In the following image, we see 5 directories. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the different directories. So that's the user, and that's the directory. It's in Spanish. Department, IT. Where the group owners are separated by different groups. The user owner has full privileges. The group owner has read and write permissions, so on and so forth. To change permissions, use the change mod command followed by the permission to change, using letters for systems and roles. So here are the different letters again: U, G, O, others, and A, all. Then add or remove permissions. So plus, minus, or equals. And then finally, specific permissions to be assigned. So read, write, execute. So looking at this, DRWX, you would have to type out all of this stuff to assign specific permissions, access control lists, and specifics for that one particular directory. Does that make sense, everyone?
Sure.
Yes, it does. And now that I'm going through this, I'm remembering that there's something, maybe Linux in the pre-work. I think, yeah.
Yeah, so regardless if this is Kali, if it's Debian, if it's Red Hat, whatever the case may be, Ubuntu, it's still going to have, all of this is still going to be applicable. This is all Linux based. Kali's not going to have any change, or it's not going to have any difference. You would still use the exact same commands across the board on any Linux OS.
In anyone?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with some of the command codes too.
So according to this image, we have a directory named IT with a file called script sh inside. The group owner has read permissions, but no write or execute permissions. We can change this using the change mod command and assigning permissions using the octal format. So script.shell. Let me validate that. Yeah, shell scripts. So this is a shell right here. And if I wanted to type something, usually it's going to be bash. Bash is like Python or Ruby. It's a programming language essentially that allows you to compile scripts and stuff like that. So read, write, execute. We can perform the same exercises above, this time changing permissions using the octal method. So that's a quicker way instead of having to type things out. If you know what number coincides with it, so read, write, execute, that's going to be a 7. That would equal a 7. If it's just read, write, it's going to equal 6. If it's read and execute, that would be a 5. If it's read, it's just 4. Write is 3. So you see it right here, 774. That would give you permissions for read, write, and execute for that particular script file. Does that make sense to everybody?
It does, yes.
Okay. Another command we'll learn is mkdir, which stands for create directory or make directory, change owner, ch owner, change group. These are different commands to do that stuff. Searching and filtering files. A common task in system administration is searching and filtering. So one of the way to do that is find and then type out the command. This command is one of the most commonly used to search for files and directories based on various criteria. For example, to find all .txt files within a path, use the following command. So this would be find name. That asterisk right there, .txt, that's like an asterisk. You fill that in as a spacer, so it'd be anything with the .txt extension on it. And the results are, so let's see if I can find, let's see if that'll work for me. Find dash name asterisk .txt. And nothing. I don't have any text documents. Other ways to search using the find command include type whether it's a file or directory, by the size, or the owner. grep stands for get regular expression. A useful tool for filtering files in Linux is called grep, get regular expression command. Unlike find and grep, grep is used to search for content within files rather than searching for the files themselves. You can search for specific words or patterns in one or more files using the following command. So that's pretty cool. If I wanted to find a particular word in say 30 different documents, I could use the grep command, and it's going to do a search of all of those text documents. It's going to find that particular word. I wish it wasn't in Spanish, but it's all good. In this example, we searched for the word test within the script.sh file, and the results displayed. Locate command. This command uses a database to perform quick searches for files throughout the system, especially useful when you need to search for files frequently and in large volumes. All right. So command line basics. They're showing this again. So these are different commands right here. In IT, using a terminal or command interpreter to communicate with our computer or laptop is common. These commands help us communicate directly with our computer, as we are giving an order that can be interpreted and processed by computer language, thus having a significant level of interaction with your PC. A terminal is a computing device that allows a user to interact. So this is a terminal right here. To interact with the computer, usually to perform tasks as running programs, logging, and so on and so forth. For years, computing terminal has been a key tool for programmers and IT experts. Notice it doesn't say anything about security, but this powerful tool allows you to interact with our computing systems, enabling users to perform various functions such as executing commands, updating software, creating files. A command interpreter, or shell, is a computer program capable of translating orders entered by users through a set of instructions provided by it directly to the core set of tools in the operating system. Using a prompt that waits for commands or instructions to be entered. So what we're looking at right here is essentially this right here. When entering the order with the enter key, the interpreter analyzes the sequence of characters entered and the syntax order is correct. Whether it be a bank data manager or FTP session, the response to the user is displayed on the monitor or in the background. The command line interface, CLI, is the type of computer user's interface that allows users to give instructions. So again, this is the CLI. CLIs can be used interactively typing instructions. So everything we just talked about in the file directory management. Some frequently encountered CLI shells are bash, shell, command prompt windows, which is PowerShell is Windows. That shouldn't be command prompt. It's actually PowerShell. Basic commands for navigation and file directory manipulation. So this is the stuff we all just looked at. So find, when you type in head, what it's going to do is pull the first 10 lines of a text from a file. Tail is the opposite. It'll give you the last 10 lines of a text from a file, which is pretty cool. Cat concatenates and writes file content to standard output, can be used to file content. So you can essentially put two files together with cat. CP, that's the command for making copies. So if I want to copy a file, I would type this copy, the name of the file.txt, and then move it to this directory home username under documents. So instead of just being able to click, pull this file, for example, if I have this and I want to take, if I want to take this document right here and I want to move it over to here, I could essentially just drag and drop it. But if I want to do that in Linux, then I would have to type out this to make it happen. And that's another thing you have to be really careful about. So many times I've copied it to a different location by accident, or I'll miss a directory or something and the file ends up somewhere I don't want. So you have to be very focused and paying attention, when you're doing these types of things. And it's just not as, easy as pointing and clicking, obviously. MV, that moves one file from another. RM stands for remove, delete, used to delete a file directory from the system. And then what you'll do is you'll put that at the end of the command. So system will ask for confirmation for deleting IO by typing in this -I. That's also known as the switch. It'll automatically confirm it. Switch F allows the system to delete without confirmation. So touch will create a blank file. Get regular expression allows finding a word within a specific file. It does a lot of other stuff too. Make directory creates a directory. Change, modification modifies everything. We just change owner. Kill, manually terminate a process. So instead of coming over here to force quit something, click on it, and then click on it, I would use kill, type out the program application that I want, and then kill it. Sudo execute command as a super user. So when you are navigating in your terminal, you want to be in the sudo privilege, because that'll allow you to do anything and everything. If you're just in a basic user, you won't be able to do things like delete a file and stuff like that. So for example, file and directory permission management. In Linux, files and directories can be executed depending on their user permissions. We can see, so as we just saw in the last lecture, this is all the stuff you would type out for this particular user if you wanted to accomplish all of these different commands that we have right here. Again, you can use those numbers, which is what I do, which is a lot. I like it because it's just faster and easier. So again, we just went over this: read, write, execute. Permissions divided in 3 parts. File owner position being the first 3 letters. So file owner's permission, first 3. Read, write, execute. The other group members' user permission. So one particular user has that value, and then the group has that value. The description indicates that it is a file has a at the beginning. For the owner user, there will only be read and write permissions, and for the rest of the groups and system users, there will only be read permissions, indicated by the R. The file directory so they're showing the exact same stuff we just saw in the last one. So each permission has a value. So these, again, those are the number values for it. Adding the permission gives 7 to make the assignment. We must add the numbers of the permission if you want to grant it. So again, as we just saw in the last one, here's the numbers for that. Makes it a lot quicker. We can change all the permissions with the command change mod followed by the octets and permissions you want to grant. So you can just type out this right here versus typing out all of this right here. This is summarized as granting read permissions to the owner user, reading and executing permissions to the rest of the user group, the read and write permissions to the rest of the system's users. So basic command for navigating and manipulating files and directories. Open your command interpreter and start exploring the various basic commands we provided. Feel free to experiment. So this ends the lecture. Does anybody have any questions before I stop recording, and then we can go into the projects and practice and we can play around with this stuff? Does anybody have any questions on this?
It's quite straightforward. I don't have any questions.
No questions for me.
Teresa, you good? Okay. All right. Well, I will stop recording now.